Good morning, participants. Welcome to the webinar hosted by the PG Department of English in association with IQAC NSS College, Pandalam. To start the proceedings formally, let me call upon our head of the department, Dr. J. Anjana, to welcome the resource person and other participants. Welcome, Anjana ma'am.
Good morning, everyone. The Department of English, NSS College, Pandalam, in association with the IQAC of the college, is organizing a webinar series titled Literature in the New World. Today, we are having the second talk in this webinar series titled Politics of Language in the Post-Colonial Literature. Today, we are having an erudite scholar and a brilliant academician as a resource person, Dr. Samuel Rufus. He is the associate professor at Madras Christian College, Chennai. He's a well-known figure in the literary academia. He has been the resource person in various national and international seminars as well as webinars. We are extremely happy and delighted to have you here, sir, this morning.
Thank you.
On behalf of the department as well as the IQAC, I deem it my great honor to extend our wholehearted welcome to this session. I also welcome Dr. Jay Kumar, the convener of the IQAC of our college, and each and every participant across India and abroad to this session. Please keep your audio and video muted so that we'll have a very seamless and hassle-free session ahead. Thank you for joining us, and now it's over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Anjana, for having invited me for this wonderful webinar series, and to Professor Ranjit and the entire faculty team at NSS College, Pandalam for having invited me. And I'll straight away go to the topic. And before that, let me ask you if you have your pen and a little notebook ready. In case you come across anything new, you could always make a note of it, and maybe later you could clarify it towards the end of the session. So now let us begin. The topic is the politics of language with reference to post-colonial literature, or the politics of language in post-colonial literature. I'll start with a basic definition, a very common definition of power. The word power, we all know, means the ability to exert influence or control over others, isn't it, right? This is a broad definition of power. There are two types of power, as we all know. Broad types of power is, one is, we call it, right, physical power. The second one, as we know, it is rhetorical power, or the power of language. So physical power, right, you can't exert physical power over a lot of people at the same time. Maybe, brawn power, you call it. You can't exercise it at the same time. It's difficult. Right? At the same time, using your rhetorical power means the power of words, you can exercise power over large sections of society and make them come to your point of view or subscribe to your point of view. And that's the power of, right, rhetoric. The definition of rhetoric is, we all know, right, the ability to convince or persuade people, as simple as that, right? Rhetoric means the ability to convince or to persuade people. So here, rhetorical power. How does rhetorical power operate in society, and what are its implications for post-colonial studies? I will start with the 1987 book that's by David Crystal. We all know this very famous Encyclopedia of Language. See, there are two books on, written by David Crystal. One is the Encyclopedia of Language, and the other is the Cambridge Encyclopedia of the English Language. Both are phenomenal books, right? He's one of the greatest linguists of the present century. He had come over, 10 years back to the British Council of Chennai. We also had the chance to meet up with him. So he, in his 1987 book, right, the Encyclopedia of Language, says that language has 7 functions, right? All functions, categorically are summed up into seven functions of language. You should please read this wonderful book. The first function, he says, the power of sound. The second function he calls recording of facts. The third function he calls expression of emotion, right, or emotional expressions. The fourth function he calls control of reality. I repeat, control of reality. This is important for us. That's why I'm talking about the fourth point, right, in special. And then he goes on to talk about, how it becomes an instrument of thought or a social interaction. And the last one is expression of one's identity, that George Bernard Shaw says in his a Pygmalion, right? I can fix a person within 1 mile's radius in London, sometimes even to a street. So I'm going to the fourth point, control of reality. How does language control reality? And what are its implications for post-colonial studies? And with reference to a few sources, visual, oral, and print, I would like to exemplify on this aspect, on language vis-a-vis reality. For Friedrich Nietzsche, we all know, one of the greatest philosophers of the past century, he says, if you want to access reality, if you want to have full control of reality, the real, he calls it, you should go beyond the realm of language and culture. Because he says the language is a trap. I repeat, he calls it the trap of language. You have to break free from the trap of language if you have to access the real reality. This is Nietzsche. After that, Saussure, one of the founder of modern linguistics, we can call him, right? He says, right, language becomes a mediator for accessing reality, right? Sign becomes a mediator. Sign, we know, is made of the signifier and the signified. It helps us access reality. So there is no direct relationship between the sign and reality, says Saussure. That means it is arbitrary. No, we all know it. And then I'll just take you to a 1946 essay written by George Orwell. It's titled Politics and the English Language. In this essay, he talks about the politics behind the English language. He calls it, double speak. Double speak means he hates metaphors because metaphors polish reality. Like Nietzsche also says, in the previous century, he says, what is truth but a mobile army of metaphors and metonymies? He doesn't believe in one truth per se. The truth structures given to us by language, according to Nietzsche, according to the post-structuralist theorists, is oppressive, and that's what Orwell says. Excuse me. In his essay, and 3 years later, in the year 1949, again he talks about in his wonderful dystopian novel titled 1984. He talks about how newspeak becomes the official controlled language of Oceania, and how it controls thought processes, the identity, and the expression, the self-expression of the people of Oceania. And I'll just take you to a book written by Catherine Belsey in the year 1999. It's titled Culture and the Real. It's a very important book. Excuse me. It's a wonderful book that I love a lot. I love Catherine Belsey a lot. She has written a lot of books, like David Crystal again. I've written a lot of books. And this book in particular interests me because she says, till the 19th, it's titled Culture and the Real. Again, she's a devotee of Lacan. Lacan says, you don't have access to the real, right? A child has access to the real only through the symbolic order. In a psychoanalytic theory, he says this, right? So only through the symbolic order, the child gains access to real, but reality is beyond the symbolic, he says. And the same applies, to Catherine Belsey, who is a devotee of Lacan. Catherine Belsey says in her book Culture and the Real, till the 19th century, we were under the assumption that culture was synonymous with the real. I repeat, we were under the assumption that culture was synonymous with the real. But in the 20th century, a whole lot of schools of social theory, the Frankfurt School, and a whole lot of other schools of social theories, made us believe that culture is not synonymous with the real. Rather, culture dictates the real, or culture produces the real. Shocking, isn't it? Culture produces the real. And culture, we all know, the dominant culture. Raymond Williams calls it dominant culture, emergent culture, residual culture, right? The dominant culture of a particular society always controls everything as regards, knowledge and, other things of society. So this dominant culture always has access to power. So power indirectly controls society or reality. And this is what exactly, post-structuralist theories tell us. How our reality is controlled or conditioned by culture. Thiongo says language carries culture, or in other words, how reality is conditioned by language. 20th century theories have given a lot of importance to the importance of language in conditioning our reality, or perspectives, or perceptions. Catherine Belsey tells us, how we are impacted by this conditioning. Advertisements that come up in the media, how they condition reality for us, how they give us culture or produce culture. Culture is something that is produced by the so-called capitalists or whoever is in power in society. Now, this is what Foucault also says in his 1969 book, Archaeology of Knowledge, right? We all know that language is oppressive. After the 1960s itself, we find a renewed emphasis on the importance of language to societal structures. So language conditions reality, and this language is oppressive in that, right, the dominant culture, whatever attribute it gives to language, it stays. If it likes the heteronormative stays, right? The others, those who are outside these binaries, these normatives, are given a pejorative label. You know what is a pejorative label? A pejorative means the same word, when it is applied alone in isolation, it becomes a negative word. Pejorative label. For example, I say, he drinks coffee. It means, he likes coffee, he drinks coffee. But when I cut off coffee and I say he drinks, it becomes pejorative. The same word drinks, when it applied to coffee, it meant something positive. But when it comes alone in isolation, it becomes negative or pejorative. So language gets a pejorative label when it comes to define or to denote or to represent the others. It could be others in the sense, others outside the normatives, the basic givens that Peter Barry tells us. Post-structuralist theories in general, post-colonial theory in particular, talks about this oppressive nature of language. In other words, it is not we who speak the language, rather it is the language that speaks us. See the difference? Language conditions, controls, constructs our reality for us, like Lacan says, or Nietzsche says, or Saussure says, or Foucault says. So after the 1960s, the turn to theory gives added emphasis on the power of language. Post-colonial theory in particular focuses on how language is oppressive. 1952, a very phenomenal, polemical, right, controversial book, polemical book was written by Frantz Fanon. I would call him, post-colonial studies scholars would call him the progenitor or the pioneer in post-colonial studies. So Frantz Fanon, right, he wrote his book titled Black Skin, White Masks. I repeat, Black Skin, White Masks, right? White masks. So in this wonderful book, he talks about how language becomes a tool of the colonizer to make the colonized internalize certain value systems as the normative. When he was in the train, he tells us of his experience, a humiliating, debilitating experience that he encountered when he was in the train, traveling in a compartment surrounded by white people. He was the lone black person in the compartment. And when, certain, white people started shouting at him and said, "Oh, black, little child there was shouting at and saying, "Oh God, black! I hate black." So as if black was synonymous with the devil. Till then, he was a psychiatrist. He was not interested in these racial politics at all. But for the first time, he says he felt that he was not a subject. He sees that he realizes, he feels for the first time ever in his life that he was an object at the mercy of somebody else. We know an object cannot determine its own identity. The identity of an object has to be given by somebody else, a subject. So for the first time, he feels that he is not a subject, but he's an object at the mercy of somebody else. And this objectification of the colonized is done through the power of language he feels and the power of the colonizer that makes him an object society. It makes him feel inferior. He says, internalizing the language of the empire, that is the English language, doesn't empower me, rather it disempowers me or makes me feel inferior. It gives me added trauma. This is very important to trauma studies also, right? Because the power of language to inflict psychological wounds on a person. And these racial stereotypes that happen in the name of language, in the power of language. 1995 memoir, Barack Obama's memoir. I always quote this because I love reading him again and again. So he writes in his memoir that way back when he was an ordinary guy, he was roaming around the streets of New York when there was a lady, a young girl, a white girl, who was talking to him. By default, spontaneously, she asks him, now see this racial stereotyping that happens. Do you play basketball? Right? A woman in the supermarket asked him, right? Do you play basketball? Oh, I like Stevie Wonder. Do you like him? Obviously, there is a racial stereotyping that has happened there. The principal of a school, he recollects, right? He says, oh, you look cool. That means, there is a stereotyping that happens. Basketball associated with the blacks, right? It could be Michael Jordan or anybody else. These racial stereotypings that happen because of the power vested in language. That's why Foucault says language is oppressive. Now, these strategies that post-colonial scholars adopt to come out of this oppressive power structure of language. After this 1952 book, Black Skin, White Masks, right, you find a wonderful book in 1989 written by Gauri Vishwanathan. It's called The Masks of Conquest. I repeat, Masks of Conquest. In the sense, right, the English, the colonizers, conquered us through a mask. The mask was, right, obviously language, the power of language. They made us feel inferior because we were lacking in culture, we were lacking in values, we were lacking in civility, and we had to internalize another language, the language of the powers that be, in order to be called civilized, right? This was the agenda. She quotes from Macaulay's, Thomas Babington Macaulay's 1835 famous minute, right? We all know the 2nd February 1835, an unforgettable day for English education in India. And she quotes from that, she says, right, what was the objective or the modus operandi of English education in India? Macaulay says this, right? A class of people, Indian in blood and color, but English in the tastes and opinions. I repeat, a class of people, Indian in blood and color, but English in the tastes and in their opinions. And we also know the famous or infamous statement that he made about a single shelf of an European library putting to shame a whole, right, the literatures of India and Arabia put together. So this stereotype of how the East is lacking in culture and they need to be civilized by giving them the language is something that post-colonial studies scholars interrogate. And in 1989, right, a very famous book was published again, apart from Masks of Conquest. It's titled The Empire Writes Back. Bill Ashcroft, we all know, right? A post-colonial studies scholar. He, along with two others, right, Helen Tiffins and Gareth Griffiths, they three together came up with a wonderful book. Now, what is the solution? What are the strategies to be adopted by post-colonial studies scholars in order to stay clear of this oppressive power structure? Thiong'o, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, he was in Delhi a few years back. Some of us had the privilege of meeting up with him also, a very old octogenarian, but still, right? The spirit within him is indefatigable. He was here, and in his wonderful essay on decolonizing the mind, Thiong'o says it is not necessarily important that we are decolonized economically. We are decolonized, physically or geographically, but more important is to decolonize our mind from the structures or the corridors of power that have stereotyped us in the realm of language. Decolonizing the mind. He talks about a specific aspect in his society, in Kenyan society, where he feels that the people there in a society, if they don't talk in English, they are looked down upon, they are reviled, they are mocked at. And this aspect made him feel very bad. So for the first time he says, I will stop writing in the tongue of the oppressor because I feel language learning was a cerebral experience, was just a cerebral experience for my children or for our children in our African society. It was not an emotionally felt experience, he says. It was not an emotionally felt experience. So from then on, he stopped writing in English and he embraced Gikuyu, his native tongue. From then on, he starts writing in that, right, in his native tongue. Chinua Achebe, on the other hand, begs to differ. He says, I appreciate Thiong'o for it, but still, he says, I would write in English, but I would use strategies. Dismantling the master's own house using the master's own tools. These are strategies. Post-colonial studies scholars, they don't neglect English because they know that almost the whole world has been colonized by English. And so they know that they cannot renounce English, but rather they could use English for their own means, using their own strategies. And what are these strategies that post-colonial studies scholars have adopted or they adopt? Some of the strategies, with specific reference to a few scholars, we will see. First of all, before we go in, I'll just give you a 2012, if I'm right, that famous movie, English to English came up, where you find Sridevi, actor Sridevi, she doesn't know her English and she's mocked at by her own family, her husband and her two children. And she feels very, down and depressed because, when she goes to the school for the open house, there also her daughter mocks her because, she feels bad because the mother is not able to talk in English. Then she has a chance to go to Manhattan in New York, and there she gets to learn the language. And when she learns English, and that she does very furtively, surreptitiously, secretly, she goes all by herself, catches a bus, goes to the place, New York Learning Center, the language learning center, and she learns the language there. And the moment she learns her first word, entrepreneur, her facilitator gives her this word. She walks down the street, and you must have seen the particular scene, right? Everyone, and it's a busy, busy peak time traffic there. She was walking down the road. Suddenly she exults. She's like dancing when she knows that she can pronounce one word in English properly, entrepreneur. This is the internalizing that post-colonial studies questions. It is not attacking the English language per se. It is, the stereotypes that come along that make you feel inferior. All along, if you had seen in the movie, she will not have a smile on her face at all. She'll always be sad, solemn. But once she gets to learn one word, she feels happy. After that, you'll see most of the time she's happy because she has learned the English language, the language of empowerment. We know this obsession with English that has caught on almost in all these post-colonial nation states. Not bad. Chinua Achebe also says it's not bad. South Korea, we know, I remember having read an article way back in 2004 where it says the young children were forced into English medium schools, and the tip of the tongues, they did an operation on the tongue because they can speak English better. South Korea. Shocking. In India, also a host of English medium schools that want to imbibe, not bad. We do literature, right? It's like self-interrogation, self-criticism. Yes. But the moment it makes us feel inferior, that is where, right, post-colonial studies is up in arms. Of course, we had Commonwealth literature, the Trinity of Commonwealth, Mulk Rajanand, Rajarao, and R.K. Narayan. They had their own strategies. Rajarao gave us a Sanskritized English, right? R.K. Narayan wrote with a typical Indian idiom. Almost all his works, novels, right? You'll find the typical local idiom. He tries to universalize the local in his own sweet ways. Yes, but I would say the transition from Commonwealth literature to post-colonial, personally, I would say, starts in the year 1965 when Kamala Das wrote Summer in Calcutta, a collection of her poems, right? And in this particular poem, titled An Introduction, she says, right, why not, please, why not, my dear cousins, and I'm just paraphrasing, why not you just allow me to talk and write in the language that I like? I am Indian, dark brown. I am Indian, dark brown. I am from Malabar. I speak 2 languages, and I dream in one. And then she gives a famous phrase: the language that I speak becomes mine. That means it could be any language. When I speak a language, it becomes mine. I internalize it. It could be half English, half Indian, whatever it may be, but it is mine. I celebrate it. It comes to me as naturally as cawing comes to a crow or roaring comes to a lion. So please allow me to celebrate my language. She was phenomenal. 1965 when she wrote this. The language that I speak becomes mine. This is a strategy. That this is where the transition comes in, right? Much before even Derrida, right, could come out with his famous essay or a lecture in the year 1966, Structure, Sign, and Play. So Kamala Das gives us a unique voice of protest where she says, allow me to speak or write in the way that I like. I'm not succumbing to any value system. I celebrate my own voice. Walt Whitman, 1892, if I'm right, Song of Myself. The very first song says, I celebrate myself. This is a strategy in post-colonial studies. Celebration of oneself, one's identity, one's voice. And he says, in Song 52, if I'm right, Song 52, he says, I sing my barbaric yop. Barbaric. My voice, it might be barbaric. Yop means hoarse, coarse, upon the roofs of the world. That means, right, although it might sound barbaric to you, it is my voice. I would speak my voice. I will not allow, like Gayatri Spivak says, right, there is a difference between representation and representation. You can't represent me. You can rather represent me from your own idiom. But representing, you can't do that. I have to speak for myself. That is why in his famous interview in 1994 to the Paris Review, Chinua Achebe rarely gives interviews, but Derek Walcott goes around giving a lot of interviews. Chinua Achebe, in his 1994 interview to the Paris Review, right, he says about this, the concept of lion that Kamala Das talks about. It comes to me as the roaring of a lion, she says. See, the roar of a lion. He says, until, I just quote Chinua Achebe here, until the lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify only the hunter. I repeat, until the lions have their own historians. Until the lions have their own historians, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. So he compares himself or their society to lions. And lions have a voice. It is so peculiar. Like Kamala says, it's a roar. And this voice is unique to them. They need not go by any other voices. They did not imbibe any other voice because they have a unique voice, roar. Edward Brathwaite almost replicates the same when he says, the hurricane doesn't roar in pentameter. It's a very, one statement that I've so loved in all of postcolonial literature is Edward Brathwaite's, it is from History of the Voice. This is a wonderful line. He says, the hurricane doesn't roar in pentameters. That means the pentameter has been the familiar mode of expression for English literature. All of English poetry, you find the pentameter, the iambic pentameter. But Edward Brathwaite says, good, the pentameter has its own experience, but it can never replicate or even come near the experience of the hurricane. Why is that? Because the hurricane has the power to even destroy you. The hurricane has so much enormous power within it. Like the roar of a lion that Kamala Das talks about. The voice of a lion that Chinua Achebe talks about. Edward Brathwaite talks about, he was the first one to come out with a concept called nation language, right? Nation language is something unique. He says, right, I write in a language that carries my cultural experience. I write in a language that carries the burden of my cultural experience. This is Edward Brathwaite, the concept of nation language. The next one is from the oral. First, I told you an example from the visual, English. The second one is the oral. Oral in the sense, a song that most of us are familiar. That's why I took a very, a familiar song. It's titled, Brown Girl in the Ring. It's a very famous song back in the 1970s. To be sure, it is 1977 or 1978. The song was very popular in those days. And it tells about the celebration of the brownness of a brown girl. And see, we should remember one thing here. We can't expect a Donald Trump to come and celebrate my identity. You can't expect, somebody from Britain to come and celebrate your identity. You can't expect a person from Australia to come and celebrate your identity. You have a voice, a peculiar voice. It is the roar of a lion or the power of a hurricane, and it's up to you to celebrate your voice. And so here, the brown girl is celebrated in her color. See, in the previous poem in an introduction by Kamala Das, we saw, I'm dark brown. She celebrates it. Color doesn't remain an obstacle for me to celebrate myself. Maya Angelou says, phenomenal woman. Celebration of myself. Walt Whitman says, I celebrate myself. And this celebration of herself in Brown Girl in the Ring, where, she's in a ring and she's brown. If you see that song, the lyrics of the song, they're so motivating. Right? She looks like a sugar in the plum. Show me your motion. Tra-la-la-la-la. Just show me your motion. Motion means, right, the sway of my hips that Maya Angelou tells us. I am phenomenal because of the sway of my hips, right? The way I walk is phenomenal. The way I, move about is phenomenal. That's why he says, show me your motion. Tra-la-la-la-la. The way you walk, the way you talk, tell me that because you are phenomenal. And the beautiful line that comes is, she looks like a sugar in the plum. That means she has her own sweetness within her. She doesn't have to rely on sweetness from somebody else. She has her own charm. She has her own aura, what in his 1935 essay, Walter Benjamin would call the aura. Aura is essentially unique to a person or to a particular object or a particular thing that cannot be replicated or duplicated. It has its own place, space in time. And this is the celebration that we find in Brown Girl in a Ring. The ring there gives her her space. The ring that makes her speak out. Her safety. She speaks out from this space, this empowered space, what Virginia Woolf would call a room of one's own. Brown Girl in the Ring. See, most of these songs of emancipation, although they are, sung for merriment these days, in Jamaica, these songs were children's songs that told them that they were special. This came way back. But here, in some of the post-colonial nation states, I'm a bit sorry to say this, that we still wax eloquent when a child talks about Mary had a little lamb. Who's Mary? What's the lamb? And what is the hickory-dickory dock? The mouse ran up the clock. The clock struck 1 and the mouse ran down. London Bridge is falling down, my fair lady. The adjective, my fair lady. How these stereotypes reinforced. Harold Bloom, an advocate of the Western canon. Post-colonial studies scholars say, right, a stereotype gets created over a period of time by constant repetition of the negativity of someone or something over a period of time. Even a canon is created by coercive repetition. You repeat over a period of time, and then it becomes canonical. You give a pejorative label to something over a period of time, and it becomes negative. So Brown Girl in the Ring is a song not only of resistance, but it is a song of celebration that extols the virtues of being brown. What Kamala Das says, I am dark, very brown. And these songs of resistance you find in Calypso. I'll just give you one song that you can, maybe after you log out, you can please check into YouTube. You have this wonderful song, a very pertinent, intriguing song for post-colonial studies scholars or for anyone who does literature. Dan is the man in the van. An amazing song, right? You'll be shocked. Right? One reason why post-colonial poetry or post-colonial, prose cannot be appreciated for its aesthetic viewpoint alone, because most of post-colonial poetry carries a burden, carries an angst. It carries a burden with it. And this particular song, please look at the lyrics. I have played it many times in my classes because, Dan is the man in the van talks about how a colonial education was forced into the people, the black people, and how it did not mean anything to them. It was just a cerebral activity. Mighty Sparrow, right? He was called the king of Calypso. Mighty Sparrow. He must be around 85 years now, if I'm right. Mighty Sparrow. He has come out with the lyrics of the song in Calypso, the Calypsonian number, where he says, what is the use of Rikki Tikki Tavi or Hickory Dickory Dock, the mouse ran up the clock? There are some cuss words, swear words also there, but remember, they are expressions of protest. So we should not take it from the literal point of view. We should look upon it as expressions of protest. Dan is the man in the van. He talks about how the colonial education forced upon them an 8th grade student in school, a black girl child in school. She is appreciated not for her intelligence, not for her abilities. In the 8th grade, they are taught what is called these poems. Hickory Dickory Dock, the mouse. The one who pronounces it well, enunciates it well, comes out with the poem well, they are given thunderous applause, a standing ovation. That means you have an English that you should look up to. You have a language, it could be the language of the oppressor, but a language that gives you your identity. David Dabydeen, in his little, very short poem called Two Cultures, talks about this. He says, when a boy talks BBC English, he's respected. When a person, in Guyana, where he is from, talks BBC English, they are respected. Oh God, he talks BBC, she talks BBC. You can't read one line or one word of the poem, I bet, right? Because it's difficult. It is in Creole, Guyanese Creole. But still, you should read the poem for the protest that it comes out with. Valerie Bloom, another writer. How David Dabydeen comes out with this protest. Towards the end, oh, there are a lot of swear words. You think upon me as a woman, or I will give you a retort, he says. Michael Deyanang, Africa speaks. You call me dark, I will raise the regal pyramids. These voices of protest. How they liberate. A.K. Mehrotra, a wonderful poet in India, he says, the borrowed tongue sets the truth, my tongue free. Right? A borrowed tongue sets mine free. It is a borrowed. But when it comes with my voice, it makes me liberated. That is why in Dreams from My Father, Barack Obama says, I felt a person without identity when I was touring Europe. When I was seeing everything, I felt an emptiness within me. Why was that? Everyone felt a subject while I felt objectified. Why was that? Then he says, maybe that's because, I'm just quoting him, my history is incomplete. My history is incomplete. I don't know anything about my history. And so, he says, I have to go back to Kenya, I guess. There, I will know the truth, and the truth will make me free. The truth is knowledge about himself. Carl Jung says, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens. This identity, self-identity, knowing who I am, my roots. Without knowing my voice, my identity, my roots, if I am going to pronounce or I am going to extol the virtues of a Wordsworth or a Walter Scott or a Shakespeare, it becomes of no use to me because it becomes just a cerebral experience. It doesn't carry the burden of my cultural experience. Derek Walcott says, I met history once, but it doesn't seem to recognize me. The reason is he wasn't given a voice. And even if they had a voice, like Gayatri Spivak says in a wonderful essay, Can the Subaltern Speak? Their voice was not heard. Although they had a voice, their voice was not heard. I met history once, but he doesn't seem to recognize me. And there is a 2005 journal article, that shaped, what is called power structures in society. That's why we feel, as practitioners of literature, every journal article that we write, every paper that we present is very important because it not only contributes something new to the already existing body of knowledge, but also transform society for the better. Right? So it is not just to get a certificate, we participate in a program, or that's what I tell my students. What is that one point that you're telling society, right, to impact or to change society for the better? Let's make the world a better place. Right? It is called seeing white. Seeing white. If you just key in seeing white, you will have access to it. By the way, JSTOR, JSTOR is giving access to its rich treasure trove of articles till 30th June because of the COVID pandemic. Because we can't access libraries, they're giving it free of cost. I've been accessing it free of cost for the past 1 month. I'm just giving you a clue. You can just log in free, access JSTOR articles. 100 articles are free, right? So in this 2005 journal article, he says how stereotypes about blacks have been perpetuated in Disney creations, Disney movies. And he also says how, right, there were no black princesses in any of the Disney, creations. Wait, there is a rider. I've seen 1953 Disney movie, right? That famous cartoon Peter Pan, right? 1953 movie. No, not in 1953. Quite recently, but it was in 1953. Peter Pan. Right from then till date, he says there have not been representations of people of color. And he says when children look at these racial stereotypes of whiteness, synonymous with gentleness, meekness, and forbearance, and a whole lot of gracefulness, when white, princesses, they don the mantle and they walk elegant and they, walk the ramp, he feels black children or children of color feel unsettled, feel very odd when they feel unnerved. They feel their identity is at stake. They lose their self-esteem, he says. So it unsettles them, it destabilizes their ego. And it was in the year 2005. And we all know how a voice of resistance, that was in 2005, in 2009, you have Disney coming up with its first black princess Tiana, right? The Princess and the Frog, right? The famous that movie that came up in 2009, after just 4 years. And after that also you have, sequels coming up. But even in this 2009, this is a very comfortable movie. A couple of years back when I was screening it for my, as part of a cousin's gathering, I was screening it for the little ones, for the children, the nieces and the nephews. One of my nieces promptly asked this question, right? When two girls were there, Tiana and Charlotte was there. Charlotte is white and Tiana is black. I said, the princess has come, right? Wait, watch, the princess has come. Then she said spontaneously, no, but I thought Charlotte was the princess. I said, no, not Charlotte. Tiana, this black girl is the princess. Doesn't she look beautiful? No, she's not the princess. The princess should be white, Snow White. Stereotypes that have come, we have internalized, where we are taught to look down on our own people. Sam Sullivan in his 1979 lecture, he says this, how he himself as a little child internalized, right, this white supremacy in the language that he was taught. 2009, there was what is called the first time representation. And even after that, although many people appreciated Disney for coming up with the black princess for the first time, but still there were scholars who said she's not quite black. She's only a bit black. She should be completely black. And you find the black princess there is so graceful, so elegant. And once you see this movie, you start to empathize or to, embrace the blackness of an individual. It is the same. Binaries are blurred. So, in 1963, August 28th, a very important day when Martin Luther gave his wonderful speech. I like just one sentence from this speech. He has a dream. I have a dream that one day my 4 little black children will be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of the character. He had a dream. 1899, when Paul Laurence Dunbar wrote Sympathy, he was giving a lament. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, taken by Maya Angelou later. It's a lament of misery. In the 1960s, it was a time of dreaming. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down when we remembered. It was a time of dreaming. After that, in the 1970s, it was a time of resistance, where post-colonial studies scholars and people from post-colonial nation states started resisting in their own literatures the internalizing power of the language of the colonizers in their own ways, like Kamala Das's poem. And after that, an Indian example I should quote is P. Sainath. the Tower of Babel. Please read this essay, Tower of Babel, where he talks about, right, the hypocrisy in language, all the useless metaphors that we use. George Orwell talks about it in his 1946 essay, the politics and the English language. He says metaphors falsify reality. Please don't use metaphors, he says, especially with regard to literal language. Don't use metaphors. So the same applies here. They celebrated it in their own way, but after the resistance period, first it was a lament period, then it was a dreaming period, then it was resistance or protest literature, and now it is time for a celebration. Celebration of what? Celebration of my unique identity, celebration of my voice, like Walt Whitman says in his Song of Myself. I celebrate myself. Or Kamala Das says, the language that I speak becomes mine. And this celebration tells us that they have a voice of their own. They will never be made to feel inferior or destabilized by somebody else, because the blind we call it. It is no more history. Histories, we call it. A celebration of realities, a celebration of Englishes. How do we do that? The Indian idiom is so unique. We have a whole lot of words that are so unique to us that many of the Western countries won't have. The cultural traditions that we have are so unique. Like, I've often repeated this concept of love marriage. You ask a Westerner what is love marriage, they'll scratch their heads. They won't know what is love marriage. We have a concept of love marriage and arranged marriage. And we always use a lot of, grammaticalizations, structural nativizations, glossings. Now, these are words I'm just quoting from The Empire Writes Back. Right? This book gives us a lot of strategies. What are the strategies we can use? Discursive practices that Foucault tells us about. Edward Said gives us what is called, contrapunctal reading. Richard Terdyman gives us what is called a counter discourse, counter discursive apparatus, which helps us in subversive readings, subversive subtext. What is a subversive reading? A submerged layers of meaning hidden within a text. What Salman Rushdie would call chutnification. One glimpse into Midnight's Children would tell us what chutnification is all about. It is a celebration. Rather than embracing the language of the colonizer per se, you celebrate your own identity, because your language that you speak should reflect your own cultural experience. And that is what Salman Rushdie does. The latest crop of youngsters who are writing, Twinkle Khanna, I've always admired her for her books now, right? The latest crop of young Sanjeev Sanyal, Ashwin Sanghi, to name a few, they write in an idiom peculiar to India. Now, the common expression that we use, right, in local parlance, coming, we never say, are you eating? We just say, eating coming right, going talking right, eating no, okay no. Right? These are all what is called structural nativisms that Bill Ashcroft talks about in his Empire Writes Back. Strategies. In Things Fall Apart, you see that. In his 1958 book, Things Fall Apart, we talk about, Obi. He doesn't say he went into a hut. He says Obi. Obi means, in the glossing towards the end, they will call it, it's a hut. Or the Obong. So, all these native words enrich and enhance or emancipate his identity, because he feels the language that I speak should bear the burden of my cultural experience. And how does it do that? When I celebrate myself. So, going back to Macaulay's Minute, where he says, a class of people, Indian in blood and color, but English in the taste and opinion. Now, after this enlightenment, we, right, in India, or we in these post-colonial nation states, we start thinking about our own identity, our own voice. Yes, I am Indian in blood, Indian in color, but I don't want to be English in taste, English in opinion. Because I have my own blood that is unique to me. I have my own color that is unique to me. I have my own taste that is unique to me. I have my own opinions unique to me, my likes, my whims, and my prejudices that are unique to me. And I'm going to celebrate them myself. Because my language that I speak has a voice that is so sweet. The other day, when I was critiquing the daffodils that is taught in colleges and schools, one lady professor came up to me and said, "Sir, whatever you say about the daffodils, right? I feel the daffodils is a wonderful poem." I said, "Good, ma'am, I appreciate that. I also love the daffodils. Even today, I have a great fascination. But how many of us here have ever seen a daffodil? I haven't, to be honest. Most of us wouldn't have seen a daffodil. Why do I have to celebrate a daffodil that I haven't seen when there are a whole lot of beautiful flowers waiting to be celebrated in my own backyard?" This is the voice that I celebrate. So today is the era of celebration when we don't acclimatize or imbibe the voice of the colonizer, the oppressor's language, but rather I celebrate myself, my English is its own peculiarities. That means I'm not going to reject English altogether, but I'm going to speak an English that is uniquely mine. Maybe it is half Indian, half English, Minglish, whatever it is, but it is mine. And this gives me my voice. And I know if I don't speak for myself, nobody else can speak for myself. And if I don't celebrate my voice, no one else is going to celebrate my voice. So this celebration of my voice, my uniqueness, therein lies my identity and a celebration of humanity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rufus. So let's celebrate ourselves. A wonderful lecture given by you. We've been reading the positive comments both on Zoom and YouTube. And there are so many positive comments as well as questions. So I think it's time for us to look upon the questions.
I think there is one question which I came across. Sir, Professor, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
See, that is one. What makes a work post-colonial? The origin or the content of the work?
Okay.
What makes a work post-colonial?
Okay.
Whether it is the origin, author, or the content.
Yes. Good. Actually, any work could be read from applying post-colonial theory. Any work, like eco-criticism, could be applied even with in a work that doesn't have trees or greenery in it. Similarly, any work could be dealt with in a post-colonial way. It could be colonial texts or post-colonial text. Any work, not necessarily the author, the origin, or the content. It could be any work, right? So, and beginning post-colonialism is a primer. I would say it is a primer. It is by John McLeod, McLeod. So this book tells us, how you can read a POCO or a post-colonial reading of text, any text. Right? It could be, whether there are implications of colonization there or without colonization, why or why not. So any text, not necessarily a post-colonial text that has its origin here. No.
Sir, another one that one participant wants to know about your views on the use of English in the study of nationalist representation.
nationalist representations. Yes,
Yeah. Yes.
my views of English, my personal views, right?
Yeah,
Yes,
must be.
I feel, yeah, thank you, ma'am. I feel we need a unique idiom, right? Not the idiom. A.K. Ramanujan gave us a wonderful essay. Is there an Indian way of thinking? This would be a good starting point to start off for this questioner, right? Is there an Indian way of thinking? It's a wonderful essay where he says yes, right, there is an Indian way of thinking, and so it could be better represented only when we have a uniquely Indian idiom that helps us better in understanding nationalistic texts, or rather it makes us engaged partners in our readings of nationalistic texts, right?
Okay, so another one. In Sides Orientalism, he speaks about Eurocentric Universalism. What is your view on this? That is
Yes,
another one.
good. Yes, ma'am. Eurocentric universals are wrong, right? Because they are totalizations. Totalizations in the sense they are generalizations. These universals, like Harold Bloom says in his Western canon, right? They tend to negativize almost all the others. The process of othering starts there when there is a universal. So, post-structuralist theories, they don't want these totalizing narratives at all. Like in his 1978 book, Lyotard says, the postmodern condition, incredulity towards these totalizing narratives. Incredulity means a disbelief. I don't believe in them because these universals cannot represent my condition. Feminism, for example, right? Buchi Emuchitta, right? She has written an essay called Feminism with a small f. She says, I reject the feminism of the West because they don't, they universalize feminism, but I don't succumb to their views because, it doesn't reflect my experience of being a woman. So Eurocentric universals are not necessarily, right, a yardstick to judge any text for that matter, or people for that matter.
Sir, another one. What about the importance of appropriation of language from empire right-backs in the postmodern literature?
Can you come again, ma'am? What is the importance of?
What is the importance of appropriation of language from
Okay.
empire rights back in the postmodern literature?
Good. Appropriation becomes a strategy, like abrogation. Bill Ashcroft talks about these as strategies. This concept is also given in another book, Key Concepts in Post-Colonial Studies. Appropriation is, I take up the language of the colonizer, I appropriate it, and I use it to reflect my own experience. Like Creole. You can never ever listen meaningful words in any creolized versions of these calypsos or reggaes, the banana boat song, right? For that matter, any of these creolized versions, you can't necessarily easily listen to them. That is because of appropriation. They appropriate it in order to bear the experience of their own culture, and so you can't necessarily, right? So appropriation becomes a strategy. It is a it is a strategy there.
Sir, another one. Non-British literature in English are almost all post-colonial. What necessitated to make a special branch of it? So, will we ever have a post-coloniality?
Yes, even the word post-colonial is a very negative label, right? Previously, we thought Commonwealth literature was a demeaning label. Then today we have what is called post-colonial studies. Even the word post-colonial, personal.
There seems to be some problem. Sorry, participants, there seems to be some technical glitches in between. Kindly bear with us. Sir, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. I think there is some problem with the connection.
Yeah, there was some problem. I think Sir has gone. He's there. Sir, can you please unmute yourself?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, it's working, sir. Yes. So please continue, sir.
Okay, so the term post-colonial itself would become a misnomer in the future. So post-colonial, yes, we call it neo-colonization today, coco-colonization today. But I feel this label will also soon disintegrate, and we'll have a better new label like we have new literatures today.
So another one. What is the connection between diasporic writing and post-colonial writing? And another one, would you please talk something about Black feminism?
Oh, Black feminism. Okay. Diasporic literature need not necessarily have the implications of the colonizer, but post-colonial writing looks upon this aspect. Diasporic writing has a different kind of a trauma. Post-colonial writing reflects another kind of a trauma. So although there is a trauma, there is an angst, but the way they express it is different. Black feminism, it is a whole beautiful area, and there are readers for Black feminism. They don't want to use the word feminism at all. They rather go by the label womanism. And some of the Black feminists like Alice Walker and others, they don't want to be branded. In India, also, most of the scholars who associate themselves with the nomenclature called feminism would not necessarily call themselves as feminists, because they feel feminism doesn't cater or is not inclusive towards their problems. Black feminism was born out of this need, the lacuna, the void that feminism did not fill it up. And this totalizing, like the previous question, right? These universals or these totalizing templates, how they made pejorative these Black feminists. And so they have their own sorority, sisterhood, that celebrates them in their own unique ways, with womanism, or another word is theonism. This is another word that Black feminists use in particular, and that is because they feel white feminism has its own restrictions. In India also, we have a special brand of feminism called it's called third world feminism. Although the label might sound a bit a misnomer, but still Chandra Talpade Mohante, right, has written a beautiful essay. Anyone doing Indian feminism should necessarily read this article. It's a beautiful essay that she's written, Chandra Talpade Mohante. It's called Under Western Eyes, right? It's an illuminating article. I cited it much. So Black feminism is another wing that's a radical feminism that dispels some of the theories laid down by Western feminists.
Sir, one question: what is digital diaspora?
Yes, well, that's a very pertinent, relevant question. Digital diaspora, in the sense, like David Crystal talks about, Orwell in 1946 talks about double speak. 49, he talks about new speak. Then you have net speak today. David Crystal says you have net speak or text speak. Text speak in the sense we use text. So digital diaspora necessarily means, I just had a passing reference of that when I was reading on digital diaspora, when your agony and your angst, right, you put it down in the digital media. Because we know Derrida gave us a wonderful text where he says, the archives are filled with violence. In the sense, right, in 10 years from now, you won't have these literal texts that we have, these hard copies of text. So you won't have archives of the literal books that we have today. So the future is all about the digital. We have a separate genre for that today, digital humanities. So digital diaspora pours out their angst, their problems, their agonies through the digital medium, and there's a host of issues to be explored there. I'm just giving you an outline.
Sir, lots of questions are pouring in. Because of time constraint, shall we wind up with one last question?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Has the discipline culture studies, new historicism, gained more value than post-colonialism? Because post-colonialism brings the colonial history to the forefront rather than the culture of the natives. In a way, holding on to this discipline is still keeping the colonizers visible in the discourses. Your take on that?
Okay. Can you repeat the last part?
Because post-colonialism brings the colonial history to the forefront rather than the culture of the natives. In a way, holding on to this discipline is still keeping the colonizers visible in the discourses.
Okay. The relevance of culture studies or new historicism or cultural materialism.
Yeah.
Right. Yes. Post-colonial studies per se looks upon texts basically with the history of colonialism, and subtextual readings or subversive readings. You do that, but new historicism or cultural materialism goes beyond that. It analyzes any text with an implication of power structures beneath it. Right. So the text, history, everything becomes integrated here. It becomes a core text here, and so new historicism literally goes beyond the purview of post-colonialism. Post-colonial texts could also be read from a new historicist perspective.
Okay, sir. Now we shall, it was a wonderful session. Now we shall have Sri Prasad from our department to propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for giving me this opportunity. And let me propose the official vote of thanks for this wonderful session. First of all, I should thank our management and our dear principal, Dr. R. Rajesh, for giving this opportunity to conduct this webinar. Next, we have to thank our IQAC convener, Dr. Jaykumar, for his constant support and valid advice in order to conduct this webinar on live. And surely there is immense help from the part of Dr. Sharavana Kumar sir from the physics department for his constant support, and our resource person. I don't have any words to say because it was really a flow of words, and always a good teacher teaches, and the best teacher always inspires her. And it was really a real journey through the words of the contemporary scenario. Especially we are living in a world of diversities, whether there is a need for celebration of diversities, and the topic you have selected, and it is exemplary. Therefore, we don't have any words to say for your magnificent performance, and it was a real extempore, and the flow of words was really counting for us too. And we sincerely thank for your wonderful participation in this seminar and for your valid pieces of advice. And next, I have to thank our HOD, the be-all and end-all of our department, for giving this opportunity to conduct this session live, and the convener of this webinar, Dr. Ranjit Krishnan sir, and Dr. J. Anjana and Dr. Ranjit Krishnan sir. They gave us the real background for conducting webinars live, and we are also in the initial stages of conducting sessions online, and all the teachers in our department. And if there are no participants, this won't be a nice endeavor. And I sincerely, from the part of our department, we sincerely thank all the participants from our state, throughout India, and also participants from outside our land. And with all your cooperation and support, we could have extended this live session to greater heights. And we hope that your constant support will be there for our next webinar too. Last but not the least, we sincerely thank the Almighty for giving us a nice atmosphere to conducting this seminar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sri Prasad. Once again, a wholehearted thanks for being with us today. It was a wonderful session. We are looking forward to more academic interactions with you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.